Welcome to Philosophy of Action. To begin with, I'd like to talk and address a core point I forgot to mention before. A core point about our discussion of reality. I missed the conception of free will. My apologies. I'll be brief in the explanation here because honestly, free will does not require that much explanation for a philosophy of action. A philosophy of action believes in bounded rationality or bounded free will, in the sense that you can make choices that are mostly free and yours to make, but the types of choices before you and your disposition towards them is bounded and controlled by your environment, biology and experiences. But there's a counterposition. It is determinism. But here's the thing, even if determinism were true, it wouldn't be actionable. If everything is predetermined, that knowledge doesn't actually guide us in what to do or how to live. It leaves us with nothing practical. So whether or not determinism is true, we should act and believe as if we have free will. Because free will, even bounded, is actionable. And determinism, in practice, is not. Now, on to the meat of the video. Everyday life and relationships. Last time we discussed the relationship between the individual and the state. Specifically, why certain policies are correct or wrong and what kind of policies a state must implement at the bare minimum in order to live within the laws of nature. For a state to truly exist and survive natural selection, it must align itself with those laws. If it fails to do so, it will eventually cease to exist, because it will lose its natural legitimacy in the eyes of the people. Now, the question shifts. How do we interact within our society? Not just within the framework of the state, but with our families, communities, and personal relationships. How do we live with one another when guided by a philosophy of action? When rooted in a core that aligns itself with nature and existence itself? This is, of course, a thought experiment. People interpret life and this philosophy in slightly different ways. But let's explore what everyday morality might look like if we truly live by these principles. To begin with, relationship and descendants. At the most basic level, everyone should desire to survive, thrive, and to have descendants. A key personal goal then is finding a partner with whom to build a family. But here we encounter the first challenge. If descendants are so important, why not maximize the chances of survival by having many children with multiple partners? History shows us that in tribal societies where men often died young in dangerous hunts or conflicts, polygamy was natural and necessary. With far more women than men, polygamous arrangements ensured population growth and secured survival. In such a context, polygamy was good, useful, and stabilizing. But today we live in a sedentary, largely safe society. Men and women survive at roughly equal rates, and in this setting, polygamy is destabilizing rather than supporting society. If the most successful men monopolize all the partners, large numbers of young men are excluded. This breeds resentment, frustration, and eventually violence. History and logic alike suggest that when too many men are denied access to family life, civil war will occur. Thus, in the modern context, polygamy is not desirable, even for the wealthy elite, who might benefit temporarily, since widespread polygamy creates instability that will ultimately threaten their survival and their descendants through uprisings. Now, the neighbors and your community. So how do we interact with our neighbors? Largely as we already do. A philosophy of action doesn't prescribe every interaction. It establishes a guiding principle. It emphasizes survival, thriving, and descendants, but leaves space for personal desires and projects. You can enjoy cars, sports, beer, or hobbies with friends. What changes is the moral framework you bring into conflicts. For example, if your neighbor borrows your lawnmower and doesn't return it, you're not obligated to forgive and forget Such a morality is religious, or at least is that morality we get from Christianity. Instead, the philosophy of action seeks relationships as transactional. Mutual aid is good, but only if reciprocated. If someone repeatedly violates your trust, you're justified in cutting them off. Forgiveness only makes sense if future reliability is credible. In this case, you should never loan that man anything ever again until it becomes credible to you that he will actually return it and will give you something in exchange, some form of help, for example. Now, friendship and loyalty. Friendships, loyalty, and positive relationships are not unconditional. They are reciprocal. Unlike vague modern expectations of friendship, A society guided by a philosophy of action emphasizes reciprocity. Helping one another is good because it strengthens survival and the thriving of the group, but it requires a return sooner or later. Spelling out these contingencies makes social life more transparent. It allows us to openly discuss forgiveness, exploitation, and obligations without relying on abstract moral commands. Relationships flourish when both sides contribute to each other's growth and survival, and they die when they don't. Partnerships. In romantic partnerships, marriage, husbands and wives, boyfriends and girlfriends, the philosophy of action does not reduce people to breeder and breadwinner. Instead, relationships are mutual contracts of support, respect and shared goals. Descendants are the foundation, but survival and thriving are equally part of the contract. Couples should negotiate roles based on their actual abilities and desires. If a woman has a better career and desires it, and a man is more nurturing and is more desiring towards caregiving, then a stay-at-home father arrangement is entirely compatible with this philosophy. What matters is not rigid tradition, but cooperation towards a shared goal of survival, thriving and descendants. Lastly, parents and children. Perhaps the most important relationship is between parents and their children, since descendants are central to raising children becomes a mission, ensuring they can also survive, thrive and have descendants. This requires sacrifice and prioritization. If possible, you will seek to protect others as protecting one another aids the public good and survival. But when hard choices need to be made, you will naturally choose your child over other people's children when forced to choose between them. That is understood in a society guided by these principles, which is why such a society should strive to avoid situations in which choices need to be made. At the same time, raising children does not mean sheltering them from all risks. Overprotection weakens their ability to develop independence, responsibility, and resilience. Children must be given the tools, principles, and freedom to grow. They need experiences, even risky ones, to mature into adults capable of carrying the philosophy forward. And protecting them at all costs without letting them develop undermines their purpose of having descendants. Conclusion. So what does this all mean? The philosophy of action provides a guiding principle, not a rigid rulebook. It doesn't demand that every friendship or hobby is optimized for survival. You can still enjoy time with your friends, games, sports, or leisure. In fact, joy and social development are part of thriving. The key is to keep the principles of survival, thriving, and descendants at the back of your mind. They become the moral framework for resolving conflicts, deciding on forgiveness, shaping partnerships, and raising children. That's the essence of applying a philosophy of action in everyday life. What are your thoughts? If you'd like to discuss this further, leave a comment. Let's keep the conversation going. Have a good day.